Joining us right now is Democratic Congressman Morgan McGarvey of Kentucky to talk much more about this. Thanks so much for coming in, Congressman. Let's talk about these tariffs. I was looking, one thing that the EU announced it's raising tariffs on is American whiskey to 50%. You're the co-chair of the Bourbon caucus in the House. How devastating is this blow potentially to the industry?
It's completely devastating. I just heard Larry Fink use fancy words to say that, oh, people are uncertain right now. No, we are certain. These tariffs are disastrous for the bourbon industry. And how? We know what happens. During Trump's first presidency, when there was a 25% retaliatory tariff put on by the EU, it cut our exports in half. It was hundreds of millions of dollars to the bourbon industry. Now they're talking about 50% tariffs on American whiskey. And this is not just cost. This is jobs. You know, in my state in Kentucky, we make 95% of the world's bourbon. This is going to impact everybody from the farmers who put the corn in the ground, to the coopers who put it in the barrel, to the union workers who put it in the bottle, to the people who drive it to the stores to sell it. This is going to impact, I think everybody in Kentucky knows somebody who works in the bourbon industry. This is going to have a devastating impact.
Canada is also slapping on tariffs and has made a kind of a public show of pulling American whiskey from store shelves. The CEO of Jack Daniel's parent company said last week this about pulling the alcohol, saying that's worse than a tariff because it's literally taking your sales away. What are you hearing back home in Kentucky? When do you think the pain sets in? When do you think they really start feeling, as you've just described, this devastating impact?
The pain is setting in now. I've talked to the union guys who work in the bourbon companies. I've talked to some of the executives as well. The pain is setting in now because they don't know. They know this is going to be a devastating impact. When does that start? Well, it starts with people literally ripping the bourbon off the shelves. I mean, I talked to one of the companies in my district. They stand to lose $40 to $50 million in Ontario province alone on the loss of sales this year. So I think the pain is setting in now. And again, and for what? What is Donald Trump's long-term strategy of placing these big, broad tariffs on our allies? We need to see that because it's certainly not lowering costs right now for Americans, and it's not helping jobs.
That's the very same question. I would say the head of the EU, the leaders in Canada, the leaders in Mexico, and elsewhere are asking as well right now. Let me also ask you about Veterans Affairs. You're on the Veterans Affairs Committee. The Secretary of the VA came out yesterday and accused Democrats of trying to scare veterans over the changes, restructuring, and the firings that they are putting into place. Let me play you what the Secretary said.
For Senator Blumenthal, Senator Duckworth, all these senators and others, even on the approach committee up there, who actually say that we're going to cut disability benefits and we're going to cut health care to veterans, all I will say to you is quit scaring my veterans. Quit scaring my employees. Don't talk in things that you know are not true.
Congressman, what do you say to that? I mean, have you actually seen benefits, health care to veterans disrupted or slashed by this yet?
Well, what I would tell the secretary is stop that. Seriously, you know what? The Veterans Committee is one of the most bipartisan places in Congress because we get together for our mission every single day and determine how do we take care of the very men and women who put on a uniform and are willing to sacrifice everything for our safety and freedom. How do we honor the promise we made to them for their service? And the reality is that when you look at this budget, when you look at the fact they're trying to keep the government open, but they are zeroing out all future funding for any veteran exposed to toxic substances. That is not the way we have done things. That is not how we have honored our promise to our veterans. So you are taking one of the areas of Washington where we actually do find agreement. Do we need to do better? Yes. We have to do better by our veterans. But having a secretary say that when he knows what's in the budget and he knows what's at stake for our veterans, that's not productive.
Let me ask you about what's happening right now. I mean, you voted against the Republican stopgap bill to keep the government funded for 6 months, keep the government from shutting down. You voted against that. So did so many Democrats. Now, Senate Democrats, they are saying they are also going to vote against it in the Senate. Republicans need them over there, so they're effectively blocking it. Do you want, given that this now appears to be a binary choice of vote for it and go along with it, or the government shuts down, do you want Senate Democrats to vote for it or shut the government down?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's talk about what the House Republicans passed. It's not a stopgap measure. It's a really crappy budget. They want to call it a continuing resolution, which is sort of fancy Washington speak for we'll just keep spending at last year's levels. Uh, but to do that, it took them 100 pages. And there's a lot of other stuff in there which is really bad. Like we talked about, for our veterans, we have always included future funding so we don't run out of funds for taking care of our veterans. That's not in there.
But given that it did pass the House, but and the House did what very effectively jammed the Senate, is the way we talk about it, and it's Thursday. What do you want Senate Democrats to do?
I'd like to see Republicans work with us on a responsible way to do this, because what passed the House is not.
Are you ready for Democrats to accept the blame, to face blame for a shutdown if it happens?
I don't think there's any way you can blame this. Donald Trump goes around right now saying constantly, "I have a mandate. I have a mandate." Listen to Speaker Johnson. He says we have a mandate. Listen to the Senate Republicans. They talk about the mandate they have. Democrats have always been willing to work with the Republicans on a budget, on making sure that we keep the government open and protecting the American people. They're the ones right now saying we have a mandate. We don't need any help. Look, we're going to continue to work. We're going to continue to be available to work to make sure that we have a responsible budget that takes care of the needs of the American people.
And that might also include at least some days of Democrats facing some real blame if the government does shut down, just because of the reality of what Senate Democrats are facing today. Let's see what happens in the coming 24-48. Thank you so much, Congressman, for coming in. I really appreciate your time.